What if I told you there's a detective commander that turns artifact tokens into +1/+1 counters and that uses dogs to make the entire engine work? Sophia, Dogged Detective. For 4 mana in Bant colors, we get a 3/4 human detective with 3 very unique abilities that feed into one incredibly synergistic game plan. First up, whenever Sophia enters the battlefield, we get to create Tiny, who is a legendary 2/2 dog detective token with trample. Right away, that's already a really solid amount of stats we're getting for just 4 mana. But more importantly, Tiny being a dog is what turns on the rest of Sophia's engine, because Sophia's entire game plan revolves around dogs dealing combat damage. Whenever any dog you control would deal combat damage to a player, you get to create both a food and a clue token. So simply by just sending your pack of dogs into combat, you are going to be generating a huge amount of artifact tokens. And yes, obviously food tokens gain you life and clue tokens draw you cards. But in this deck, those tokens are much more than just utility resources, because Sophia gives us a third ability that ties everything together. For just 1 generic mana, we can sacrifice any artifact token we control to put a +1/+1 counter on each dog we control. And this is where the deck really comes alive, because it creates an incredibly satisfying gameplay loop. We attack with our dogs, they generate us artifact tokens, we sacrifice those tokens to Sophia, our entire pack of dogs will grow in power, which will make the next combat step even more brutal for your opponents. And that's honestly what makes Sophia this awesome of a commander. She is both the token generator and the payoff sitting right there in the command zone. Now there is something really important to understand here. This isn't a dog tribal deck. The dogs are mostly vessels that carry the counters that Sophia generates and allow us to convert combat damage into artifact tokens. What we're really playing is an artifact token synergy deck, built around food, clues and other artifact tokens that we can convert into permanent +1/+1 counters. The dogs are simply the delivery system that keeps the engine running. And while Sophia might not be the most broken or the most explosive commander that I've ever built, this is easily one of the most fun and synergistic decks that I've ever put together. Every card in this list connects to at least 5 other cards. We generate artifacts to make counters, those counters will make our creatures unblockable, and whenever those unblockable creatures do connect, we get to generate even more artifact tokens. Watching all these little synergies fit together feels incredibly satisfying, and I'm really excited to show you how all the pieces come together. Now one more thing before we dive into the deck. This list is built on roughly a €300 budget, but throughout the video I will be pointing out some budget alternatives if you want to make this deck more accessible for you. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up into 7 categories: the artifact tokens, the +1/+1 counter synergies, draw and support, acceleration, the actual dogs, protection and interaction, and the lands. And let's start with the real engine of the deck, the artifact token synergies. These are the cards that will allow us to convert all of the clue and food tokens that we'll be generating with our dogs into value, while also helping us generate even more artifact tokens along the way. Astrid Pet, a 2-mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield or it attacks will generate you a food token, already giving you some sacrifice fodder for the turn that Sophia comes down, and over the course of the game, if you can get a couple of attacks in, she will give you a consistent stream of artifact token generation. And passively, whenever you do sacrifice either a food or a clue token, Astrid gets to explore, meaning you get to reveal the top card of your library, and if it is a land card, you get to put it into your hand. If it's any other card, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and you can choose to either put it back on top of your library or put it into your graveyard. And explore is just a fantastic mechanic for this deck, because if it is a land, you get some free pseudo card draw. If it's a non-land, you get to filter the top card of your library, and the fact that you also get to put a counter onto this creature will just grow her body over time and will trigger all of the other counter synergies we play in this deck. And the best part about this ability is that it will trigger whenever you sacrifice a food or a clue to any effect, including Sophia. So instead of having to pay the 2 generic mana to crack any of these artifact tokens, you can just stick to your game plan, sacrifice everything to Sophia to put counters on your dogs, and you will get a huge amount of triggers of this effect. Campsite Cuisine, a card I honestly didn't know existed before making this deck. Whenever this enchantment or any legendary creature enters the battlefield, you get to generate a food token, which, as you will see later, due to us playing this many legendary creatures, will provide you with a really consistent stream of artifact generation. And a nice little interaction is that whenever you do cast Sophia with this on the battlefield, you will get to generate 2 food tokens, because both Sophia and Tiny are legendary creatures. And on top of that, this card also gives you a way to turn all of your food tokens into actual damage. Whenever you attack, you get the option to sacrifice any amount of food tokens. Then you get to give that many creatures a +3/+3 stat boost, trample, and indestructible until the end of turn. The stat boost will allow you to deal a huge chunk of damage to your opponents. The trample will make it really easy to get combat damage through with your dogs and generate even more food and clue tokens. And the indestructibility will ensure that you never lose any of your dogs in combat. Piper Ride. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to investigate that many times. Now I know, dealing combat damage with a really small 2-drop creature is quite unreliable, but as you will see later, we do play a ton of effects that will make our creatures unblockable. And passively, whenever you do sacrifice a clue with this card on the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control, which obviously just scales perfectly with her own first ability. You can just sacrifice any of your clues to either draw a card or to grow your dogs with Sophia, stack some counters onto this creature, and the more counters you are able to stack onto Piper, the more clue tokens she will generate you whenever she deals damage. Mutagen Man, the Living Ooze. For 2 green mana plus X, you get a 2/3 trample body that comes in with X Mutagen tokens. Mutagen tokens being a new type of artifact token we got in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle set, which have an activated ability that for 1 generic mana, tapping and sacrificing them will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control. Sadly, that ability does have the limitation that you can only use it on sorcery speed. That being said, Mutagen tokens are just the perfect new addition to this type of deck. We can use them to trigger any of our counter synergies, we can use them as sacrifice fodder for Sophia, or we can just use them by themselves to stack counters onto non-dog creatures like our Piper Ride. And passively, this creature will also reduce the cost of any activated ability that any of your artifact tokens have by 1 generic mana, which has some really good applications in this deck. It makes your clue tokens really efficient by just allowing you to pay 1 generic mana to draw 1 card, and it will allow you to crack Mutagen tokens for absolutely free and start stacking counters onto your creatures. Academy Manufacturer, a classic 3 mana creature that is an absolute must include in any sort of artifact token deck, and that is due to its incredibly potent passive ability. Whenever you create either a clue, a food, or a treasure token, you get to create all 3 of those instead. And obviously this effect is just incredibly busted, because now whenever you do play or attack with your Astrid pet, or you play any legendary creature with a Campsite Cuisine on the battlefield, you will get to generate 3 artifact tokens. The fact that you also get to generate untapped treasure tokens that you can use immediately for mana will set you up for some incredibly explosive plays. And the synergy this card has with Sophia is just insane, because Sophia's ability will actually generate you artifact tokens in 2 separate instances, meaning that whenever you are swinging your dogs at your opponents with an Academy Manufacturer on the battlefield, every dog that connects will generate you 2 treasures, 2 clues, and 2 foods, generating you a total of 6 artifact tokens for each dog that connects. Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. Donatello the Brains. Whenever any token would be created under our control, we get to generate an additional Mutagen token, synergizing really well with all of the artifact tokens we'll be generating, and also, like the previous card, double dipping on Sophia's ability. Whenever you now connect with any of your dogs, you will get to generate 1 food, 1 clue, and 2 Mutagen tokens, giving you an insane amount of artifact fodder to sacrifice to Sophia to grow your dogs even more. And fun fact, Donatello will trigger off any token being created, not just artifact tokens. So whenever you play Sophia and you do create Tiny, you will instantly get a free Mutagen token. Martha Jones. Whenever she enters the battlefield, she will instantly generate you a clue token, giving you fodder to sacrifice to Sophia and also setting up her next ability. Because whenever you do sacrifice a clue token, both this creature and one other creature you control will become unblockable until the end of turn. Like I mentioned, unblockable effects are just perfect for what we're trying to do in this deck. You can just sacrifice all of your clues to Sophia's ability to buff up your dogs, you will get a bunch of Martha triggers and be able to make all of your dogs unblockable, and then you will be able to deal a huge amount of combat damage with your buffed up dogs, which in turn will generate you a new wave of clue tokens that you can sacrifice on your next turn and do it all over again. Nuka-Cola Vending Machine, a 3-mana artifact that for 1 mana and tapping it will generate you a food token, which I suppose is quite an okay ability to get more food tokens on the board, but the main reason why it's included is its passive effect. Whenever you sacrifice a food, you get to generate a tapped treasure token. Now, as you can imagine, with all of the food tokens we'll be sacrificing to Sophia's ability, this card will generate us a huge amount of treasures, giving us even more artifact tokens to sacrifice to Sophia and also giving us access to a huge amount of mana. Since this card gives us some sort of an additional token generating trigger, it does scale really well with cards like Donatello or Academy Manufacturer. Now, while this card is an absolutely fantastic inclusion in the deck, it is quite pricey. And if you do want to keep the deck a little more budget friendly, you can replace it with a Tireless Tracker, which is a 3-drop creature that will generate you a clue token whenever a land enters the battlefield, and whenever you do sacrifice a clue, you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. Peregrine Took, a 3-mana creature that has exactly the same effect as a Donatello. Whenever one or more tokens would be created under your control, you get to generate an additional food token, synergizing really well with all of our token generation, while also generating us a total of 3 food tokens and 1 clue token whenever we do connect with one of our dogs. Now, just that ability alone is already more than enough reason to include this card in the deck. But on top of that, he also has a passive effect that allows us to sacrifice 3 food tokens to draw a card. And thanks to things like Campsite Cuisine, Sophia, and his own first ability, we will always have a huge amount of food on the battlefield, and this ability will be able to draw you a huge amount of cards. And before I forget, there's also a 2-card combo whenever you do combine Peregrine Took with a Nuka-Cola Vending Machine, which will require you to have both cards on the battlefield, and you will have to control at least 3 food tokens. You start this combo by sacrificing those 3 food tokens to Peregrine Took's ability, which will result in you getting 3 vending machine triggers. This will generate you 3 tapped treasure tokens, and thanks to Peregrine Took, you will also get to generate 3 new food tokens. Then Took's ability does resolve and you get to draw a card. And from this point on, you can just keep repeating the loop because you will always have those 3 food tokens available to sacrifice, which will result in you being able to draw an infinite number of cards, and you will also get to generate an infinite amount of tapped treasure tokens. Now, this isn't a combo deck by any means. Both cards are really strong in their own right in this deck, and it is sort of an incidental combo inclusion. Stridehanger Automaton, one of my personal favorite cards in the entire deck. Whenever any amount of artifact tokens would be created under our control, we get to generate an additional 1/1 Flying Topter token. And passively, this card also gives all Topters you control a +1/+1 stat boost. And this thing goes absolutely crazy with all of the artifact tokens we'll be generating. Being it our Academy Manufacturer, our Peregrine Took, or even our Vending Machine, you will get a huge amount of power in the air, and this card can actually win you the game all on its own. And to just put into perspective of how powerful Sophia's ability is, whenever any of your dogs do connect to an opponent, you get a total of 4 power and toughness in the air, which, trust me, does add up really fast. And now that we're on the topic of win conditions, Cyberdrive Awakener. Whenever this 6-mana creature enters the battlefield, all non-creature artifacts we control will be turned into 4/4 bodies, and this effect will apply to anything. All of our treasure, food, clue and mutagen tokens, and even all of our mana rocks. And on top of that, this creature will also give all other artifact creatures you control flying, meaning that you can go from a cute board state just controlling a couple of dogs and a gazillion artifact tokens to suddenly having like 60-80 power in the air and instantly enabling you to just take out your opponents. One of the best win conditions in the entire deck. And the last card in this section has a really similar effect. Rise and Shine. For 2 mana you can turn target non-creature artifact you control into a 0/0 creature and put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Which is a pretty underwhelming effect, but this card also has the overload mechanic, meaning you can pay 6 mana and instead this effect will apply to all non-creature artifacts you control. Just like a Cyberdrive Awakener, animating all of your artifact tokens and enabling you to swing for a huge amount of damage, which usually your opponents will never ever see coming. And the fact that this card actually puts counters onto your creatures will trigger a ton of synergies in this deck, making it even better. Next up, we have our +1/+1 counter synergies. Once we do have a steady stream of artifact tokens to sacrifice to Sophia's ability, these are the cards that will allow us to turn those counters into even more pressure. They will help us stack even more counters across the board, or they will turn all of those counters into additional benefits for us. Hardened Scales. Yeah, you knew this card was gonna be in the deck. It's a 1 mana enchantment that whenever you would put any amount of counters onto a creature will give you that many counters +1. Since in this deck all of our counters are put onto our creatures in separate instances of just 1 counter, this card will essentially double our counter output, making cards like our Piper Ride, Astrid Pet's Explorability, Sophia's counter stacking, and even all of our mutagen tokens double as efficient. Hardened Scales really is one of the most efficient 1-drop cards in existence. Michelangelo, Weirdness to 11. This card is basically a Hardened Scales on a turtle creature body, having exactly the same ability that will essentially double our counter output, and on top of that, whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you also get to generate a mutagen token, giving you immediate fodder to sacrifice to Sophia, or giving you the ability to instantly put 2 counters on any creature you control thanks to Michelangelo's first ability. And now let's get into one of the most powerful cards in the entire deck, Yotian Descendant, the simple 2-drop uncommon creature that whenever any artifact enters the battlefield under your control will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control. Now with all of the artifact tokens we'll be generating, I probably don't have to explain how strong this card is. Whenever any of your dogs connect, you will get 2 free counters per dog. Whenever you generate extra tokens of your Academy manufacturer, you will get 3 counters. And if you combine this card with a Donatello or a Peregrine Took, you will get to distribute a huge amount of counters, which you can obviously use to just grow your entire board, or you can start stacking a huge amount of counters onto your Tiny and just dealing a huge amount of damage thanks to his Trample. And a really similar card for just 1 mana more is Rosie Cotton, and that is because she has exactly the same effect. Whenever you do create any sort of token, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control, which will even trigger whenever you do create Tiny. And she also comes in with her own food token, instantly giving you an artifact and triggering her own ability. Lonis, Genetics Expert, who is in my opinion the strongest clue card in existence, which I already showcased in my dedicated Lonis video. It's a 1/2 creature with the evolve mechanic, meaning that whenever any creature enters the battlefield with power or toughness higher than Lonis, you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto this creature, which synergizes really well with his first ability, because whenever any number of counters would be put onto Lonis, you get to investigate that many times, obviously giving us a really consistent stream of clue token generation, especially when you combine it with cards like Piper Ride, Yotian Descendant, or even by just using your mutagen tokens. And on top of that, Lowness even has another ability that scales with clue tokens. Because whenever you would sacrifice a clue token, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on any other creature. Both acting as a really great reward for whenever we do sacrifice clue tokens to Sophia or to draw cards, and also being a fantastic clue token generating engine. And just like I explained in my Lowness video, you just have to sneeze at this card and it does go infinite. And in this deck you can use one of two cards to set up the combo. You will need a Lowness on the battlefield and then either a Rosy Cotton or a Jolteon Descendant. And to get the loop started you just have to create one artifact token or be able to put one +1/+1 counter onto Lowness. Let's say you generate a food token which will result in your counter creature triggering. You will then put the +1/+1 counter onto Lowness, he will give you a trigger and generate you a clue token. The clue token entering will then give you another trigger of your counter generator, which once again will allow you to put a counter onto Lowness. And that's it. From here the loop just keeps repeating itself, which will end up with you having an infinite amount of clue tokens and an infinite amount of +1/+1 counters on your Lowness. Now once again, like I explained with the Nuka-Cola vending machine and Peregrine to combo, all the cards used would be included in the deck anyways. It's just a happy little accident that you can also set up a combo with them. High Score, a 3-mana enchantment that once again has exactly the same effect as a Hardened Scales, giving us one additional counter whenever we do place counters. Now due to it costing 3 mana, it is way less efficient than a Hardened Scales, but in return we do get a passive effect. At the beginning of our end step, it will check if we control the creature with the greatest power, and when we do, we get to draw a card. Now I can guarantee you with all of the counters you'll be stacking, it will be really easy to meet this requirement, making this card act as some sort of a Phyrexian arena, drawing you one additional card per turn. And another interaction I'd like to explain is how it works when you have both a Hardened Scales and this card on the battlefield. Let's say you then put one single +1/+1 counter on a creature. Since both of these cards are replacement effects, you will then get a total of 3 counters. These type of replacement effects don't actually stack with each other and you will only get one additional counter per replacement effect. Kodama of the West 3, a 3-mana creature that will give all modified creatures you control trample. Modified creatures being things that are equipped, are enchanted with an aura, or the most relevant part have +1/+1 counters on them. Now obviously, since we can easily stack a huge amount of counters onto our dogs with Sophia, this card will both ensure we can get combat damage through to generate artifact tokens, and it will prevent our opponents from using 1/1 squirrel tokens as jump blockers. Talking about dealing combat damage, this creature also gives you one of the best payoffs in existence for connecting with modified creatures to your opponents. And that is that per modified creature that connects, you get to search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And this will be really easy to trigger because this entire deck resolves around swinging with a huge amount of dogs with counters on them at your opponents anyways, both allowing you to accelerate your mana like crazy while also filtering all of the basic lands out of your deck, making sure you won't draw into any lands in the late game. And since this is quite an expensive card, I also have some budget alternatives. You can go with an Abzan Falconer, which will give all your modified creatures flying. You could go with a Duskshell Crawler, which will also give all of your modified creatures trample. And a little more expensive but also really efficient is a Sphere Grid, which will also give trample, and whenever any of your creatures do connect, they will get an additional counter on them. Herald of Secret Streams, the most premium evasion piece we have access to in this deck. Any creature you control with a counter on it can't be blocked, which in the early and the mid game will make it really easy to connect with your dogs and generate a huge amount of food and clues. And in the late game, when your dogs are buffed up, you can just turn them sideways and take all of your opponents out of the game at once. No matter how big their board state might be, they won't be able to block your creatures. Next up, we have the draw and the support. These are the cards that will keep our hand filled, make this deck a lot more consistent, and provide additional support tools that make this entire strategy come together. The Ooze, a 2-mana legendary artifact that has a really similar effect to Lozolito. Whenever any creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it would leave the battlefield, you get to generate Mutagen tokens equal to the number of counters it had on itself. And this little card basically gives us some sort of insurance versus board wipes and removal. Because let's say you do control a board of buffed up dogs with counters on them, and an opponent does decide to play a board wipe, you will get to generate an immense amount of Mutagen tokens in the process, which you can use on a future turn to just start rebuilding your board and getting a huge amount of Sophia activations, or even just animating all of them with a Cyberdrive Awakener and taking an opponent out of the game instantly. And on top of that, it also has an activated ability that we can tap it and exile any card from a graveyard to create a Mutagen token, giving us a way to produce additional artifacts and also acting as a really solid graveyard hate piece, which you can use to totally disrupt the game plan of any sort of land recursion, reanimation or spell slinger player. Ray Fillet, one of the strongest card draw engines we got in the Mutant Ninja Turtle set. It's a 3 mana 0/2 flying creature with the evolve mechanic, and due to it having a base power of 0, it will just get an evolve trigger of any creature you play, instantly getting counters on himself. And his passive effect works in exactly the same way as a Bread for the Hunt. Whenever any creature you control with a counter on it would deal damage to a player, you get to draw a card, which obviously will draw you like 3 to 5 additional cards per combat step thanks to all of our dogs with their counters on them. And the reason why I prefer this card over an enchantment like Bread for the Hunt is due to you getting a flying body with counters on it that will also trigger his own ability of One Mind, the simple 3 mana spell that will draw you 2 cards. But whenever you control both a human and a non-human creature, its cost will be reduced by 2 generic mana. Now while this isn't any sort of draw engine, it is a really efficient one-time draw effect, because whenever you do cast Sophia, you will also instantly get Tiny on the battlefield, making you instantly meet the requirement for the cost reduction of this card. Irma, part-time mutant. At the beginning of combat on your turn, Irma turns into a copy of any creature you control, but her name still remains the same. Then you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Irma. Now the fact that she does retain her own name is actually quite relevant, because this effect will allow you to copy any legendary creature you control and you won't have to sacrifice any of those creatures to the legend rule, making you able to just get double the value of any of the legendary creatures we play in this deck. You can double your Michelangelo to get even more counter production. You can double up on your Academy Manufacturer, which will now produce you a total of 9 tokens whenever you create a clue, food or treasure. You can double up on your Mutagen Man, making you able to sacrifice your clue tokens to draw cards for 0 mana. And you can even turn her into a copy of your Ray Fillet to just draw double the amount of cards. Whatever you have on the board, Irma will always provide you with some really solid value. Terra Symbiosis, a 3 mana enchantment that whenever you would put any amount of counters onto a creature you control will draw you that many cards. This effect will only trigger once per turn. Now baseline, I can guarantee you that this enchantment will draw you at least 1 card per turn cycle, because we will always be putting counters onto our creatures. But in this deck we also have many ways to bypass the once per turn restriction, because you can just activate Sophia during your own turn, opponent 1, opponent 2, opponent 3, and this card will draw you 4 cards per turn cycle. And it also scales incredibly well with all of our hardened scales effects. Since those are replacement effects, Terra Symbiosis will actually see you putting 2 counters onto a creature and drawing you 2 cards in the process. And a card that is really similar to Terra Symbiosis but a lot more potent is Danny Pink, a 4 mana creature that will give all creatures you control an additional line of text. And that is that whenever any amount of counters would be put onto this creature, you get to draw a card, which will also trigger once per turn. Now the reason I mentioned this card is more potent than a Terra Symbiosis is the fact that it doesn't have the 1 creature restriction. So let's say you have 4 dogs on the battlefield and you activate Sophia. This will result in you drawing a massive amount of 4 cards for just 1 generic mana. And just like with a Terra Symbiosis, you can just activate Sophia during every player's turn and you will get to draw a total of 12 cards per turn cycle. 1 card per turn per dog you control. Now while Danny is on the more expensive side, I don't have a budget replacement for this one. The card is just way too good not to include in the deck. Maskwood Nexus, a 4 mana artifact that will give all creatures you control or in any other zones all creature types. dogs. And as you can imagine, turning all of your creatures into dogs is just insane when combined with Sophia. Because now you won't just be generating artifact tokens whenever any of your dogs connect, and you won't be limited to only being able to stack counters onto your dogs. You can now do so on every creature. And this card does open up some really interesting synergies in this deck, because now you can start sacrificing your clue tokens to Sophia, which will put counters onto your Lonus, generating you even more clue tokens. And once you are able to turn the top deck tokens that Stridehanger Automaton will generate you into dogs, you can use Sophia's ability to just start stacking counters on them, and you will be able to swing for a huge amount of damage in the air. The Fairies Ageless Insight, a 4 mana legendary enchantment that whenever you draw a card that's not the one you drew in your draw step will give you 2 cards instead. Now while this card obviously synergizes really well with things like Danny Pink, Ray Fillet or Terra Symbiosis, the main reason it is included in the deck is because it makes our clue tokens into card draw machines. For the low cost of 2 generic mana, you will now be able to draw 2 cards of any clue token you sacrifice. Basically, whenever you do have this card on the battlefield, you won't ever run out of cards anymore. Elspeth Stormslayer, a massive 5 mana planeswalker with a passive ability that whenever any number of tokens would be created under your control, you get to create twice as many instead. Let me just give you a couple of examples. You will get 4 tokens whenever any of your dogs connect, double the value from your Peregrine Took and your Donatello, a total of 6 tokens from your Academy Manufacturer, and you will be able to take over the game with your huge army of Topters of your Stridehanger Automaton. Now while that passive ability is the main reason she is included in this deck, she also has 3 really relevant loyalty abilities. Her +1 ability will generate you a 1/1 White Soldier token, which will be multiplied to 2 tokens thanks to her passive effect, giving you the option to get some additional chum blockers on the battlefield. Her 0 ability will put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and they will gain flying until your next turn, which obviously scales incredibly well with all of our hardened scales effects, will draw us a ton of cards when we have Danny Pink on the battlefield, and will give all our dogs flying, enabling us to deal a huge amount of damage and start generating even more artifact tokens, which will be doubled up by Elspeth. And her last ability allows us to destroy any creature on the battlefield with mana value 3 or greater, a really solid removal option you can use to deal with any problematic creature or commander on the battlefield. Due to Elspeth being this strong of a card, she also has a really hefty price. A great budget alternative for this is an Adrix and Nev, which is a 4 mana creature that has exactly the same passive effect and will double up on any token you produce. And the last card in this section is a Disciple of Realize, a 6 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows you to sacrifice another creature you control, and you will get to gain life and draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Later in the game, when you do have a couple of dogs with a huge amount of counters on them and you desperately need to draw cards to go find some options for the current given board state, you can just trade in one of your huge dogs and draw like 10 cards of it. But the main reason this card is included in the deck is because it is an MDFC land card, meaning you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for green mana and even enters untapped for the low cost of 3 life. This card should be viewed as a land first, but whenever you do draw into it in the late game, it actually gives you a really potent utility effect. If you're enjoying these in-depth deck videos and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. Members will get early access to the deck lists, exclusive Discord chat rooms where I'm always talking about what I'm currently working on weeks before the videos even go live, and of course that beautiful Panzer helmet next to your name on YouTube. And a really wholesome thing happened when I was talking with the members about this Sophia deck that really put a big smile on my face. Kamgote over in the Discord mentioned that his daughter Violet absolutely loves drawing animal creature tokens as magic cards, and she actually drew her own version of Tiny. And Violet, you did an amazing job. So if you do decide to build this deck for yourself, please consider using Violet's drawn version of Tiny as your token to show her some love. I've included it as a downloadable image in the description below. And if you want to be part of heartwarming moments like that, come join us in the Panzer MTG Discord. That's where the real magic happens. Next up, we have the acceleration section. Now obviously all of the synergies you just saw do require a ton of mana. These cards help us fix our colors, get Sophia out on turn 3 really consistently, and make sure we can start generating tokens and deploying our dogs as early as possible. Noble Hierarch, a 1-drop creature that will tap for 1 mana in any of our colors, and it also has the Exalted mechanic, meaning that whenever we attack with one singular creature, it will get +1 toughness and +1 power until the end of turn, which might come in really handy to just get that 1 point of additional damage with your tiny and make sure you can generate those food and clue tokens. Sol Ring. It's a commander staple and it is just the best mana rock in existence. It will allow us to get Sophia out on turn 3, we will be able to cast all of our big spells way ahead of the curve, and we will always have a use for the colorless mana it produces, either to just get more Sophia activations or to start cracking our Mutagen food and clue tokens. Arcane Signet and Talisman of Curiosity, 2 simple mana rocks that will allow us to get Sophia out as early as turn 3, and the reason why I decided to go with artifact based acceleration instead of things like a Farseek is that they actually will give us triggers of things like Yotian, and whenever we do cast our Cyberdrive Awakener, they will be animated into creatures and we will be able to get extra damage through. Hurt Heirloom, a 2 mana rock that will tap for 1 mana of any color, but we can only use that mana to cast a creature spell. Now since we are playing a total of 43 creatures in this deck, we will always have a use for the mana it produces us. And on top of that, it even has an additional ability that will give any creature we control with power 4 or greater both trample and an additional line of text, being that whenever this creature deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to draw a card, making it act as a really solid mana rock with an additional card draw option. And thanks to the trample, we will always be able to get combat damage through and start generating artifact tokens of Sophia. Bloom Tender, whenever you tap this creature, you get to add 1 mana to your mana pool for each color amongst permanents you control. Now baseline, this is just a 2 mana mana dork that will tap for 1 mana. But once you do have your Sophia on the battlefield, this creature will tap for a massive 3 mana, which will accelerate your tempo by a lot. And if you don't want to spend the money on a Bloom Tender, you can just replace this card with another 2 mana mana rock. Torgal, a Fine Hound, a 2 mana creature that for some reason is a wolf and not a dog, that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And whenever you cast your first human spell in a turn, it will enter with an additional +1/+1 counter for each dog/wolf you control. A really on-team card that is actually quite potent in this deck, especially due to us playing a total of 11 humans plus Sophia and always having a huge amount of dogs on the battlefield. Torgal can easily put like 3, 4, 5 additional counters on any human you cast, which is actually quite solid, especially considering you get his ability on a regular mana dork. Jaheira, Friends of the Forest, a 3 mana elf that will give all tokens you control the ability that you can tap them to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. And in this deck you will always have between like 10 to 20 artifact tokens on the battlefield, which Jaheira will allow you to tap for an insane amount of mana. You don't even have to sacrifice them. You can use the mana to just dump your entire hand on the table, get a huge amount of activations out of your Sophia, and this card is also really nice whenever you combine it with clue tokens, because you can just tap your clue tokens for mana and then use that mana to sacrifice the clue tokens you just tapped and draw cards of them, essentially allowing you to sort of sacrifice them for free. And a card with exactly the same effect is Urza, Lord High Artificer, which will also passively enable you to tap any untapped artifact you control to add 1 blue mana to your mana pool, enabling you to do the same crazy things as you can do with Jaheira. And on top of that, he even has 2 other abilities. The first one being whenever he enters the battlefield, he will generate you a construct token with power and toughness equal to the amount of artifacts you control, which in this type of artifact deck will always have like 20 ability power. You can then use cards like Martha Jones, make it unblockable, and you will be able to take an opponent out of the game with your single construct token. And for 5 generic mana, we get to shuffle our library, reveal the top card, and we are allowed to play it until the end of turn without paying its mana cost, giving us a really solid outlet for Urza's mana producing ability. Whenever we have like 30 artifact tokens into play, we can just tap all of them, pump all of that mana into Urza's ability, and we will essentially be able to cheat cards into play for free, making sure that none of that mana we can generate goes to waste. And now it's finally time to talk about the good boys themselves. And remember, this isn't a dog tribal deck. These creatures are just used as vessels to carry the counters of Sophia, and that allow us to convert our combat damage into food and clue tokens. Now, a small little disclaimer, I did decide to include a bunch of changelings in this list because they are technically dogs. But if for thematic reasons you want to play actual dogs and not changelings, I will be flashing into the screen at the end of this section what dogs you can include over the changelings. District Mascot. This good boy will enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on itself, already giving you some additional value whenever you do have a hardened scales on the battlefield. And for 2 mana and removing 2 counters from this creature, we get to destroy any artifact on the battlefield, which is quite a potent repeatable removal effect, especially due to the fact that this card will always have a huge amount of counters thanks to Sophia's ability. K9 Mark 1. For as long as this creature is untapped, all legendary creatures you control will get Ward 1, making it slightly more inconvenient for your opponents to deal with any of your legendary creatures and Sophia. And for 2 mana and tapping this creature, we can make target legendary creature we control unblockable until the end of turn, which is a really nice effect to use on your Tiny to start generating artifact tokens, or to just close out the game once you have a huge amount of counters stacked on him. And this creature is also a legendary doggo, which is quite relevant for the next card. Yoshimaru, Ever Faithful. Whenever any legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And due to our commander generating 2 legendary bodies whenever we cast her, and with all of the other legendaries we are playing in this deck, this little 1-drop good boy gets out of control really quickly, especially when you combine it with a card like Hardened Scales, which will just double up on the counter production. Selfless Savior, a 1-mana creature you can sacrifice to give any other creature you control indestructible until the end of turn. Now obviously we don't want to be sacrificing our own dog bodies, but it is a really nice way to just ensure you can keep your Sophia on the battlefield if an opponent is playing a removal spell or a board wipe. Mod Dust Changeling, a really weird looking dog that will allow us to tap any untapped creature we control to give it flying until the end of turn, which will ensure we can connect for combat damage and will generate us food and clue tokens of Sophia. And since in this deck you will barely ever be swinging with your Sophia, you can always tap her to give this creature flying. Faithful Watchdog, a 2-mana vigilance creature that will enter the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on itself, giving you some really solid stats and also synergizing really well with cards like Terra Symbiosis because it will draw you 3 cards whenever it enters the battlefield. Generous Pup, probably the strongest dog in this entire deck. Whenever you put any amount of counters onto this creature, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. This ability will only trigger once per turn, and this effect just gives you some crazy value. If you just play 1 artifact with a Yotian Descendant putting a counter on this creature, you get to buff your entire board. Whenever you now activate Sophia, you will get 2 counters on each dog you control, and obviously you can easily bypass the once per turn restriction by just activating Sophia in each player's turn, making this creature generate you a total of 4 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control per turn cycle. Loyal Warhound. Whenever this 2-drop creature enters the battlefield and any player controls more lands than you do, you get to search her library for a basic plains and put it onto the battlefield tapped, giving you a really nice way to accelerate your mana from as early as turn 2. And if you're not the starting player of your game, there will always be an opponent with more lands in play than you do, and you will always get this effect. Metallic Mimic. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, you get to choose a creature type, and this creature will be the chosen type in addition to its other types, giving you an additional 2-drop dog body, and whenever any creature of the chosen type would enter, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on itself, just making sure that all of your dog buddies are bigger and they will always be able to trigger cards like Kodama or Ray Fillet because they will have counters on them. Pack Leader, a card that will passively give all other dogs you control a +1/+1 stat boost, which I suppose is quite nice to just buff up your board even further, and whenever it attacks it gives you some sort of a Dolmen Gate effect, preventing all damage that would be dealt to dogs you control until the end of turn, which will enable you to just swing all of your dogs at your opponents and you won't ever have to worry about losing them in combat. Philia, Exuberant Shepherd, a 2-mana flash doggo that whenever it attacks allows you to exile up to 1 non-land permanent on the battlefield. Then at the beginning of the next end step that permanent will return to the battlefield, and if it entered under your control you get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Philia. And you can use this effect in multiple ways. If any of your opponents do control a big blocker that you don't want to swing into, you can just attack with Philia, exile that card, and it will be gone until the next end step. And obviously you can also use this effect to blink your own cards and get even more ETB triggers. While Philia will also just keep growing her body in the process by adding more and more +1 counters. And another really nice blink target for Philia is Spirited Companion, a simple 2-mana enchantment dog that whenever it enters the battlefield will draw you a card, giving you what is essentially a dog cantrip because it will replace itself whenever you play it. Unsettled Mariner, whenever this card is on the battlefield it will give both you as a player and all permanents you control Ward 1, making it way less efficient for your opponents to use any sort of single target interaction, and whenever you are playing against a Storm player who is trying to resolve a Grape Shot at your face, they will have to pay 1 additional generic mana per copy they target at you, or all of them will just get countered. Chomping Changeling, whenever this weird looking 3-mana dog enters the battlefield you get to destroy any target artifact or enchantment on the board. A really solid way to deal with any problematic cards on the battlefield like a Heuristic Study, a Smothering Tide, an Aura Shards, whatever. Mirror's Entity, a 3-mana dog with a really crazy activated ability. By paying X generic mana, each creature you control will get base power and toughness X, and they will become changelings in addition to their other types. Now first up, this ability can just straight up win you the game whenever you do have something like an Urza or a Jaheira on the battlefield. Just tap all of your artifact tokens for mana, invest it into this ability, and suddenly every creature you have on the board will have like 20 power and 20 toughness. While the other part of this ability makes your entire board into changelings, and it functions in exactly the same way as a mask with Nexus, enabling you to generate tokens of Sophia whenever any of your creatures do connect, and giving you the ability to start stacking counters on your entire board when you sacrifice something with Sophia. Mowu, Loyal Companion, the biggest good boy in this entire deck. It's a 4-mana Vigilance Trample body that has a Hardened Scales for itself attached to it, because whenever any amount of counters would be placed onto Mowu, he will get that many +1. A really big dog body that will scale out of control incredibly quickly, and thanks to the trample, your opponents will always take damage from this and they won't be able to chum block it. And the last weird looking dog in this section is an Omni Changeling. For 5 mana you get a changeling that will enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the board. And thanks to this card having the convoke mechanic, you can tap creatures to help pay for its mana cost, and usually you will be able to cast this for like 1 or 2 mana. And like I mentioned when I was talking about Irma, you can copy some really impactful creatures in this deck like an Academy Manufactor, a Stridehanger Automaton, or even something simple like a Yotion Descendant. But the best part is that you can even use this effect to copy your opponent's creatures, and they will be dogs in addition to their other types. So suddenly you can copy that Elesh Norn that's on the battlefield, the Etali that your opponent is about to swing with, or you can even copy a Balin and start generating absurd amounts of value with your tokens. And if for some reason you don't want to play any of these changelings in the deck and you want to play actual dogs, I will be flashing the swaps into the screen right now. Next up, we have the protection and the interaction. Sophia is the heart of this deck, and keeping her on the battlefield for as long as possible is really important. These cards will both help us protect our board and all of our value engines, and they will give us tools to disrupt our opponent's game plans. An offer you can't refuse. For just 1 mana you get to counter any non-creature spell, but in return the controller of that spell will get to generate 2 treasure tokens. Now obviously the main weakness of this this deck is either Sophia being removed or any of her opponents casting a board wipe. And this card giving you the ability to stop all of that from happening for just 1 mana is a really good deal. The fact that you are giving them 2 measly treasure tokens in return to prevent them from disrupting your entire game plan is always gonna be worth it. Swords to Plowshares. For 1 white mana on instant speed, you get to exile any target creature on the battlefield. One of the most efficient removal spells in existence. And you should always include efficient removal spells just like this one in all of your decks. Because if an opponent is setting up for a game win with either their commander or any other value creature and you have no way to deal with it, the rest of the cards in your deck don't matter anymore because you can't win the game if you lose the game. Requisition Rate. A 1 mana spell that will allow you to choose any of its additional modes. For 1 extra mana you get to destroy target artifact, target enchantment, or you get to put a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control, giving you either a way to buff up your board and trigger cards like Terra Symbiosis, or giving you a way to deal with any problematic card on the battlefield. And the best part about the spree mechanic is the fact that you can actually choose and pay all of the modes and get all of the effects of this card at once. Downstruce. For 2 mana on instant speed, you get to give all permanents you control and yourself hexproof until the end of turn, which will prevent all of your permanents by being interacted with single target interaction. And whenever you cast a spell, you can also decide to gift a card, meaning that you can make an opponent draw a card. When you do, all your permanents will also get indestructibility until the end of turn, making it into the perfect answer for any sort of board wipe. Dromoka's Command. A really efficient 2 mana spell that whenever you cast it will allow you to pick 2 out of its 4 fantastic options. The first option will prevent all damage that any sorcery would deal, which is a perfect answer whenever an opponent is playing a Blasphemous Act. The second option will make target opponent sacrifice an enchantment. The third option will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control, triggering any of our counter synergies. And the fourth option will make any creature we control fight a creature we don't control, giving us a really solid removal tool we can use to get rid of any creature we don't like on the battlefield. Repulsive Mutation. For 2 mana plus X, we get to put X +1/+1 counters on target creature. And then we get to counter target spell unless the controller of that spell pays X amount of mana, X being the biggest power amongst creatures we control. Now in this type of deck, this card functions as an improved version of a classic counter spell. Since we will always be controlling a high power creature, it just will counter any spell. Your opponents won't be able to pay the cost. And the other part of the effect will allow us to put a huge amount of counters onto one target creature, which is a perfect way to grow your tiny and deal a huge amount of combat damage, or to draw a huge amount of cards of your Terra Symbiosis. Winds of Abaddon. A 2 mana spell that will allow us to exile any creature an opponent controls, and they will get to search their library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped, essentially functioning as a 2 mana sorcery speed Path to Exile. Now the reason this card is included in the deck is due to its overload mechanic. Whenever you overload it, you get to exile any creature you don't control, making it act as a one-sided board wipe, and you will then be able to swing your massive army of dogs with counters on them at your opponents, and usually you will be able to instantly win the game of this. And even if you don't win the game of this, the fact that they will get to search their library for a huge amount of basic lands usually doesn't matter that much. Nowadays, in modern day Magic, most multicolor decks are only playing like 5 basic lands, and they won't actually have that many targets to fetch. Oko, Thief of Crowns, a 3 mana planeswalker that is banned in the modern format due to it being this strong. He comes in at a massive 4 starting loyalty, and his +2 ability will generate you a food token, which will give you another really consistent way to generate artifact tokens. But the main reason why Oko is this strong is his second ability, which will even increase his loyalty instead of decreasing it. You will get to turn target artifact or creature on the battlefield into a 3/3 elk that loses all abilities. And this type of effect is really brutal against commander reliant decks, because let's say you are playing against a Krenko player, you can just turn their commander into an elk, and for as long as they have no way to sacrifice their Krenko or get it off the battlefield, they won't ever have access to their commander again. A really oppressive effect that's really annoying for opponents to deal with. And remember, remember, you can keep using this turn after turn for as long as Oko survives. And his last ability will allow you to exchange control of any artifact or creature you control for a creature an opponent controls with power 3 or less, which I suppose is a nice way to trade in all of the excess food and clue tokens you have for any of your opponent's Esper Sentinels, their Ocelot Brides, or even their low power commander. Bridgeworks Battle. For 3 mana you get to give target creature you control a +2/+2 stat boost, and then it will fight a creature you don't control. Since we'll always have huge creature bodies on the battlefield, this card functions as an excellent spot removal spell. And just like a Disciple of Realize, you should view this card as a land first, that whenever you don't need a land drop will give you an additional benefit. And now that we're on the topic of these NDFC cards, Witch Enchanter. A simple 4 mana creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow you to destroy target artifact or enchantment, giving you an additional way to deal with whatever your opponents are doing, and also functioning as a land you can tap for mana whenever you need it. And the last card in this section is a Wave Goodbye. For 4 mana you get to return any creature on the battlefield without any +1/+1 counters on it to its owner's hand, which as you can imagine in this deck, thanks to Sophia's counter stacking and things like a Yotian Descendant, will always be a one-sided effect, unless you are playing against another counter deck, I suppose. A really simple but really efficient card. Last up we have the lands. Since I tried to keep this deck as accessible as possible, I did decide to go with a budget-friendly mana base. If you want to make it more consistent, you can easily upgrade it by including things like Bant lands, fetch lands, shock lands, whatever. We're also playing a couple of utility lands, so I'll start by going over those. Abandoned Air Temple and Gavany Township. Both are cards with exactly the same effect. By paying 4 mana and tapping these lands, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, which in the late game is a really nice tool to dump any excess mana into to just buff up your board even further. And these type of effects also synergize incredibly well with Danny Pink. Essentially reading, whenever you activate this effect you get to draw 1 card for each creature you control. Hidden Hideout. A land that will enter the battlefield tapped and tap for 1 mana of any of your colors. And for 2 mana and tapping it, we get to give target creature we control with a counter on it lifelink until the end of turn, which is really nice once you have a gazillion counters stacked up onto your tiny to gain a huge amount of life. Minas Tirith. For 2 mana and tapping this land, we get to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability if we attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn, which is something we will always be doing in this deck anyways, giving us an additional card draw option we can easily use later in the game on a land. Secluded Starforge. A land that will tap for a colorless mana, and by paying 2 generic mana, tapping this land and any amount of artifacts we control, we get to give any of our creatures a +X power boost, X being the amount of artifacts we tapped. Like I already mentioned, it really isn't all that hard to get like 10, 20, 30 artifact tokens on the board when playing this deck, which this land will convert into a huge power boost, and whenever you use it on your tiny, thanks to him having trample, will always get a huge amount of damage through. And for the regular mana producing lands, we're playing 3 of the Tango lands, 3 check lands, 3 pain lands, a fast land, a command tower, a filter land, an exotic orchard, a Yavimaya, a tapped tri-land, an urban retreat. And that's it for my in-depth Sophia Dog Detective deck, a commander that turns a pack of good boys into a full-blown artifact engine. It's not the most explosive or broken deck I've ever built by any means, but it certainly is one of the most synergistic ones, where every small interaction just feeds into the next and keeps the engine running. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, let me know by dropping a dog and a detective emoji in the comments below. Share this video with any person you know that likes dogs, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you won't miss out on the next deck. Thanks for watching, enjoy swarming the board with your good boys, and I will see you in the next one.